What's up, horror fans? Pete here, and I would give a piece of my ear to have Bruce Campbell be my dad. That's right, we are talking about Hysteria, the show that is streaming on Peacock right now. We did the first 4 episodes on the Lasser cast, and we love this show. So we're covering the last 4 episodes, 5 through 8 today. And I can't think of a better person to talk about the show with than my good friend over there, Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel. Danny, you ready to talk about Hysteria?
Yeah, I watched this. I think I finished these 4 episodes within the day that we recorded last week. So I actually
Oh my
had to
God.
go back and watch a couple clips last night, just because it's been a crazy work week. We had Halloween, of course. So happy Halloween to everybody, and it feels like I watched this show a year ago when I only watched it a week ago, and I'm already ready for a season 2.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I binged 4 episodes last night because my work week has just been like crazy. Like work's been crazy for like the last 2 weeks, and so I haven't had time to like watch stuff. But yeah, it was great just like plowing through it. I just really enjoyed it, and I too could go for a season 2 right now. So let's kind of I had a question for you right off the top of the bat. Who's your favorite character on this show?
So I think once the show ended, I really liked. I actually really love Jordy and Spud. I
Mm-hmm.
think they and this is with no disrespect to MJ Anthony, who plays the lead character Dylan, but he spends half the show basically getting manipulated by his hot high school girlfriend,
Yeah.
and bullied around. And I feel like Kiara Aurelia and Casey Kurtis, who play Jordy and Spud, they carry a lot of the character work
Mm-hmm.
for the kids, the high
Mm-hmm.
school characters here, and they were the two that I felt like I would most like to want to hang out with.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because when I was in high school, I was part of a trio. I had my two best friends were my friend Linda and my friend Josh. Josh ended up becoming one of my best men at my wedding. Linda was in my bridal party. And we literally would come home every single day to my apartment. My parents knew them as their adopted kids. We would hang out in my room, watch movies, talk about the boys and the girls that we liked, and then we would have dinner with my parents, and then they would go home to their house. And then this was high school for junior and senior year. And it the relationship between those three characters, Dylan, Jordy, and Spud, kind of reminded me of me growing up with my two friends, Josh and Linda. I also really love Faith and Ingrid, Nikki Hahn, who, she's the one kidnapped at the beginning. I
Yeah.
loved her turn throughout the series.
Right.
And I really love that Millie Shapiro got more to do as the second 4 episodes, as the episodes we're going to talk about today. She becomes less of a background character and more of a focal point. And I really love her. I said this last week. If you're looking for Mike Flanagan, if you're looking for a unique choice to play Carrie in your new Amazon Carrie series, I think Millie Shapiro would be fucking great.
Yes.
And yeah, it's real easy for me, the Evil Dead super mark, to say that Bruce Campbell's my favorite character. That goes without saying. But I really enjoyed the high school characters on the show.
Oh.
All of them show there's a depth to every character, which is really weird. Even the villain characters on this show have so much depth to them. And I'm sure we'll talk about, Judith and Tracy and who are the villains, and how they have parts to their characters that kind of make you almost want to root for them, but then they pull back and you're like, oh, no, fuck that character. But like in a good way, like the way that you're supposed to when you watch a show like this.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think you make a really great point about Dylan too. For me, I would say that Jordy is probably my favorite character on the show. And there's a scene in the last episode that I think is definitely my favorite part of the show. I was like, oh, I really love this particular part. We'll get to that in a little bit. I want to, we're about 5 minutes in, but I want to tell people we're basically just spoiling this show. So if you haven't seen Hysteria at this point,
the whole series was uploaded like instantly. I saw the premiere of this. I said this last week at Comic-Con on the Thursday night. That Friday, I think it was the 18th, they put all 8 episodes up. So if you are looking for a new show to binge, stop watching now, go to Peacock, watch Hysteria, see episodes 1 through 8, then come back. You can watch our episodes 1 to 4 review from last week, and now we're going to spoil the shit out of how season 1 ended.
Yes, yeah. So, like with Dylan, they really do focus on him a lot in the first 4 episodes, and he seems like the main character. But then there is this kind of pivot to where it seems like Faith becomes like the main character, or at least like just as important as Dylan. And Dylan kind of fades into the background a bit more too. So what's really great is there's this one episode in the last 4 where we see Faith's kidnapping, like the time leading up to her kidnapping, and then we also see the time leading up to her mother's kidnapping, and then what happens after both of them are kidnapped as well. And it makes both characters seem a lot more interesting, and honestly, like what happens to them makes the show more interesting too. Because what's really interesting about this show in general is it's a balancing act. It keeps being like, oh, is this a supernatural thing? Is there a demonic presence that's affecting this town? Or is this all just a comedy of errors where like we keep thinking somebody is a Satanist, or we keep thinking that like a devil is involved, but it really ends up just being this like real world issue that you just sort of assume is a supernatural thing.
So I really like how this show was advertised as like Satanic Panic. The panel, like when I was at Comic-Con and I was looking for horror things to do, I looked and I saw 6 o'clock Thursday night, new Satanic Panic horror series on Peacock, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, let me go check that out. And what this show does so well, and you just alluded to it, is it balances the satanic and the panic. Like it really does, because there are so many moments in this show where there is this gigantic CGI, like freaking cool as hell looking demon bat. And you're like, whoa, okay. Like, and there's an earthquake, and there's like, it kind of makes you feel like you're watching Buffy. Like, oh, is this town on a hellmouth? Like, what's going on here? You know, and there's this mysterious rash going around that everybody's getting. But then really the show comes back to the idea that it's really about panic and how fear can cause chaos and how fear can cause a mass paranoia. Right. And it kind of makes it kind of does feel like a perfect show for the time that we're living in, where there are things that are going on right now where you say there's no possible way that millions of people could believe this, but yeah, there is, like, there's parts in this show about killing cats, and then I think they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and so it like it does feel timely to 1989. It also feels timely to today, and I like that the show does what you were saying, balance the satanic and the panic together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that mob mentality, and especially in the last episode, that really becomes a major issue. it's funny because there aren't as many allusions to our current life besides the mom mentality part. But there was one part that was particularly depressing to me, which is that at one point, Faith has to go get birth control because she's having these really bad cramps, right? And she just goes to the nurse, and the nurse like gives her a flyer for like Planned Parenthood, and she's like, "Hey, you need to go take the pill, not because you're going to go have promiscuous sex, but because like it'll help with these horrible cramps that you're having now, right?" And it was just sad. Okay, well, in the modern day, I think that like they're shutting down Planned Parenthoods. Like I know that they raised the price of birth control. There's all this crazy stuff, but in the '80s, they're just like, "Here, kid, go take these pills. You're going to be okay." So that was a little depressing. But that episode was one of my favorites, where they essentially just kind of go back and forth between Faith and Tracy's experience and how they kind of mirror each other. It really makes the mom seem a lot more, like her character's a lot deeper than I thought. And we find out like who's behind this secret group with these secret masks, these white creepy masks that look like the Court of Owls from Batman. And that's kind of maybe where the real villains of the show are. It really comes down to the mom, who is like this sort of Stephen King religious zealot mother character, like Carrie's mom, like you just mentioned Carrie before, and then also that woman that's in The Mist that riles up the people in the supermarket.
Mrs. Carmody.
Right. So she plays that kind of character, but what's really great about it is, especially with this episode, the one that I keep talking about, it really justifies like her motive. It's like everybody does something in the show and it makes sense why they're doing it. It's not like, go ahead.
No, I loved. That's what I like. It felt like they were just setting you up to hate Tracy, Anna Camp's character, because we've seen this character before, and you brought up two perfect mirrors of that character, Mrs. White and Miss Carmody in The Mist. And then we get episode 5 actually starts in the background. In her background, where we meet her parents, played by Barbara fucking Crampton and Jeffrey fucking Combs, reunited, and it feels so good. Wish they were on the show a little bit more, but I love that they had them together in that cameo. Right. And she is actually a victim of this reverend, played by, I don't know if you mentioned it when I stepped out, but the incomparable Garrett Dillahunt, who I've been a fan of for so long. What was the name of the show where his daughter has a baby and him and Martha Plimpton, it was a comedy show. Him and Martha Plimpton are the parents of and they have a grandkid and they have to raise. It was such a funny show. If anybody in the comments knows what I'm talking about, I'm going to Google it. I'm going to Google it as soon as we're done here, and I'm going to go, of course, that show. But he was great on that. He's been really good in a bunch of things for years now, and I thought he was so creepy and so good here as this reverend who basically uses extreme measures to beat the devil out of your child, even though these are just rebellious kids. Right. And we see Tracy as a kid who left to go to a commune, and she hooks up with this guy, and she's doing psychedelic drugs, almost like a Woodstock thing, and she ends up seeing the devil, and her parents send her to this reverend, and so we get this kind of empathy for her as a character now, as a mother, where you're like, oh, she's not just, but like that was also that, to bring it back to Carrie, like Margaret White in Carrie talks about how she allowed herself to be possessed by the devil, and with Carrie's dad, and it was like, it becomes this, she doesn't want the same thing to happen, but she ends up creating the same situation. And I really like that. Almost until the last minute of the last episode, I didn't know where they were going to go with Tracy as a character. Like, you thought, oh, maybe she realizes that, like, her daughter is really important, and like she has to, like, break away from this reverend character who's setting up her life for failure and all these terrible things that are happening. But then she doubles down and tries to basically lead an exorcism / public execution. And I love that the show ends, again, we're spoiling it, but the show ends with her basically being arrested, but as a martyr. And, if there's a season 2, she's now set up to be an even more powerful character because she has that cult of personality for that community. Happy Hollow, like, most of them look to her at the end as like, she's the one who got the devil out of Linda, played by Julie Bowen. And even though, obviously there was nothing there, the fucking church burns down, like all of these terrible things. And like the craziest part of this is that 2 of the people that like are looking at her as a hero, as a martyr, are the parents of the boy who died because of her. And it's like, that is like point. Full on cult mentality. And that's like the scary shit that this show gets into that I fucking love.
Yes. And the scary shit that's going on in our world right now. But, it's interesting that you say that, right? Because, like, this show kind of wears its influences on its sleeve, right? You got The Exorcist. I guess in the ticker I wrote The Exorcists. I guess there's 2 of them in the sequel. And Rosemary's Baby. And that's, like, a big part of the show. I think what's interesting about this show is it wants you to think, oh, this is kind of like The Exorcist in the 80s. Or, oh, this is Rosemary's Baby in the 80s. In the 80s, like suburban town, but then it's not really. It's about human like mentality and just like how people get convinced of things, right? That's a major part of the show. Like, I'm not just talking out of my ass when it comes to these Exorcist and Rosemary's Babies references. Like with The Exorcist, for example, there's this part. Let's talk about how Jamie Flanagan is in the show. Like, I think he's in the first 4 episodes as the priest. And I didn't make the connection. I knew that he had written one of the episodes, and I didn't make the connection of like, oh yeah, he's also in the show as the priest. But at one point, he's talking with Dylan's mom and the dad. He's asking her questions. He's interviewing her. He's got a tape recorder. And he comes to the conclusion that there's a demonic presence in the town. And he tells everybody in the town at one point that there is an infestation. And I was like, oh, I've heard that term before. And I remember that when we Exorcist TV show with Ben Daniels and stuff, they talk about the steps in which a person becomes infected, right? Or possessed, I'm sorry. And the first thing they say is like the infestation part, where essentially the demon lets its presence be known. Now, it does that in this show. And I was like, oh, yeah, reference that fucking Exorcist show, because that show was awesome. And I really love the idea of the exorcism not just being like people just saying random Latin verses and throwing holy water, but that there's like a process. It's like, oh, the demon is part of the process. Then it's going to move on to this part. I really love that shit. I love that on the Exorcist show. I like that in this, even though it's a very small part. And then the Rosemary's Baby part, I'm sorry for going on a little long, but the Rosemary's Baby part, at one point, the mom reveals that she had this scar tissue within her womb and she couldn't have a baby. So she's reaching out to any kind of source, religious source to help her conceive a child. And she admits that like she might have even prayed to the devil to have a kid. And so for a while there, I was like, oh, is this going to take a turn where like Dylan is the Antichrist, or, is he a demon?
And then we would have been able to include the Omen with The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby.
And that's the whole thing, right? Is that like there is Omen, like feel like you kind of feel like you're watching the Omen as well.
And
But
and
yeah,
and again, we're talking spoilers here. Like the show does not pick a side. The show
no,
doesn't. The show hints at the whole time that there is something weird going on that we can't explain. Like like Linda's Julie Bowen's character is literally speaking in tongues. That's actually the name of one of the episodes, Speaking in Tongues, which I want to say is an allusion to the Talking Heads. There is also an Arcade Fire song called Speaking in Tongues. Episode 5 is called Mother, which is very perfect, based on the Danzig song. And then there's It's Late and Heaven on Fire, which are, I
right?
believe, Queen and Kiss songs.
Yes,
But it the like she is speaking in tongues. Like there's this great scene that I think you were alluding to where he's with the dad and they're talking to Linda, and we see her speaking in English, and then like there's like a snap, and he goes, I want to play for you what you just said, and he plays the tape recorder, and it's just like, and so there was an earthquake in suburban Detroit at the beginning of this show that nobody can explain. There's, these visions. There is this rash that appears on everybody that never really gets explained one way or the other. And then the show, like one of the last things you see before the closing credits is like, oh, I love you, Dylan. I love you, Mom. Yay, family's great. And then like you see that bat demon like leaning in, and you're like, maybe what you just said, maybe Dylan is the product of some demonic thing, and maybe season 2 will lean further into Omen territory where, oh shit, what if I'm what if I'm a good person? What if I'm a good high school kid who has friends, cares about my family, is even religious, and then, oh fuck, I find out that I might be the Antichrist.
yeah.
Which is, I think, a unique take on like Antichrist. Well, I think like the only time I've ever seen that might be Little Nicky.
Oh, okay, right. That's a classic.
Where it's like, what if, because like we've seen The Omen, right? Where Damien is basically evil from fucking birth.
Yes.
And he manipulates the world around him. But what if, and again, now we're just taking it into hypothetical territory, but like,
That's okay.
I think that would be a very interesting area to go. And I was thinking the same thing watching it, like, oh, what if, and again, this is something we talked about last time. I love the dad. I love that they didn't Mike Wheeler this character, and he's not just some schlub in a chair who's going, all right, you're possessed.
Right.
And he, he's there for his wife. He's there. He tries to still be there for his son, despite all this other crazy nonsense that's happening. Again, I think this comes back to Matthew Scott Kane, who's the creator of this show, the writers of this show. I think it was David J. Goodman, who was at Comic-Con, who was one of the writers.
Yeah.
I know Jamie Flanagan wrote one of the episodes.
Right.
Jordan Vogue Roberts. Eduardo Sanchez directed one of these episodes. He's one of the guys from Satanic Hispanics and, of course, Blair Witch Project.
Oh, okay.
So they had such a good creative group of people behind the scenes and good writers and directors. And there's so many directions that I thought the show was going to go, and that I hope the show continues to go into next season.
Yeah. But you know what, Danny? The thing is, I actually kind of don't want there to be a season 2, because I feel like they were able to tell a story and come to a conclusion. And I feel like by keeping that balancing act of not going like full supernatural, or not being like, oh, well, it was all just people's hysteria, right? That caused this whole thing. Like keeping that ambiguity, I feel like in season 2, you have to lean in to one direction or the other. They probably would lean in the supernatural direction more in the second season, like develop more of a lore for the demonic stuff. I kind of almost don't want that. Like, what's interesting about this show, right? I used the term comedy of errors before, where like essentially one person thinks that the other something, but they're, and then like weird random things happen so that it's like they both kind of believe something that's not true, right? And that happens every fucking episode of this show with all the different characters, especially with Dylan, and then who's his like hot girlfriend?
Judith.
Thank you, Judith. Like every episode, it's like Dylan could almost get exposed for, just not being an actual Satanist and just, being into his band. And they always come to this point where he's exposed, but he's able to get out of it. There's a part where he could get like in trouble with the law because they think he's connected to this murder, but then he's able to get out of it. That happens every single episode. And sometimes it could be a little tedious, but what I think is really interesting about this show is it wants you to think that it's this like mean show. It wants you to think it's like an Exorcist type show or like Rosemary's Baby or something like that. But then it's actually like a sweet show. And like every time you get this scene, you're like, oh, I've seen this scene in a horror movie. I know it's going to happen here. Let me give you one example and you can kind of elaborate on it. At one point, Judith gets her friend who like exposed their cult, which isn't even like a real cult, right? But her friend basically goes to the authorities, gets them in trouble, and they kidnap that girl. The members of the cult surround the girl, and Judith's like, okay, we're going to get our revenge on you. And this boy who, what's the name of the boy, the African-American football player boy?
Cliff.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Cliff like takes out his switchblade. It goes flick right in front of the camera. And you're like, oh shit. Like your mind goes, okay, they're going to stab this girl. This is going to escalate. This is the second to last episode. Here's where it escalates and becomes this different thing. Or like, so then all the kids in the cult say like, you know what, we've gone too far. We're not doing this. Then they give Cliff the knife and it's like, okay, he's going to actually take it too far and he's going to murder her. Nope. He says, I'm not going to do it. And then it's like, okay, well then Judith is going to take the knife and kill the girl. And it's going to be like, it escalates. But then no, her mom comes down and stops it. So it's like every time you think it's going to get dark and brutal, it pivots and it's just like a sweet kind of show. Would you agree with that? Or yeah.
Yeah, like even like just sticking with the character of Judith, like you ask yourself, is she really a Satanist? Is she evil? Is she the villain of this show? And then you realize at the end that like this is just a girl who is so desperate to get out, to like find anything of comfort in small town USA. And she's desperate she's a big city girl. No, I feel like I'm singing a fucking 80s song. She's a big city girl trapped in suburbia, and she's desperate to get the fuck out. And it's like her only way out is to do this satanic cult stuff. And then she loses like her chance to get like college recommendation letters and scholarships. And she has this like nightmare vision that she's going to be stuck in this world forever. And then her mom is like, well, I made a deal with your dad that you can go live with him in LA. And it's like, all of a sudden, like, she becomes like a normal person again, where it's like, oh, I get to get the fuck out of here. And like, I just have the feeling that like, she'll go to LA, she'll live a normal life, and she'll never think of Satanism again, because it was her escape from the monotony of suburbia. Whereas in LA, you don't have to get out of, there's no monotony in LA. You're in the second biggest city in the fucking world, you know?
Yeah.
Although she is moving to LA right before like the LA riots, so she should watch out. But I liked how I felt like that for all of these characters. Like that. And to your point that you made about, I hope there isn't a season 2, because this kind of wraps it up so neatly. The only way I think a season 2 would be really would work in the idea of it doesn't necessarily choose a side, where maybe it chooses both, is if you do something with Dylan where he is some way demonic because of like his birth, but he maintains his like that he is a good person, and so you have this like good demonic kid versus now a imprisoned Tracy who has this cult of personality where she like gets out and becomes like one of those Pat Robertson type preachers. And
Right.
so you have like this like we're the good guys religious cult versus the demonic kid and his friends, but he's a good kid. And it's like good evil versus evil good. Uh, and I think that would work. But
Hmm.
I do agree with you that the ending of this show works so well that there is that fear that continuing the story could spoil a good ending.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I always felt that way about Dexter, where Dexter hit the most perfect natural endpoint. I don't know if you were a Dexter fan, but
I watched the first 4 seasons.
okay, absolutely perfect. Season 4, the ending of season 4 for me was a perfect endpoint. He comes home, he's just murdered the Trinity killer, John Lithgow, and he finds his wife dead in the bathtub and his son bathing in blood on the floor, just like him. And he realizes that the cycle is going to continue. And if the show ended there, I would be celebrating Dexter as one of the greatest shows in the history of television. And unfortunately, they went 4 more seasons, ended it terribly, then brought it back. Now they're going to have a prequel series, and it feels like they're beating it into the ground. So there are shows that do have natural endpoints. And I don't know if this is a natural endpoint because it's only season 1, and like I love the show. So
Yeah.
there's the part of me that's like, fuck it, we want more. But then
Right.
there's the
Right.
part, but then, you kind of hinted at that idea that, like sometimes wanting more leads us to Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends.
Ooh.
Um, yeah. But I have faith in the creators of this show. I mean, they've given me no reason to doubt them. Matthew Scott Kane was able to bring in some really good writers and directors. I
Yeah.
mean, like you brought up last week, Jordan Vogt Roberts, who directed the premiere and finale of this show, fucking directed Kong Skull Island. Like, this
Yeah.
is a guy who's directed like a hundreds of millions of dollars production.
Right.
And we rewatched that whole Monsterverse, and we kind of both agreed that that might be our favorite one of those movies. And it's like, Eduardo Sanchez is a guy who, Jesus Christ, 25 years ago changed the
Wow.
movie industry with the Blair Witch Project
Right.
and has been working steadily ever since. Just directed one of my favorite parts of Satanic Hispanics last year. And he gets an episode here, and we get, Jamie Flanagan is in the writing room, and there's other. So like, I trust the creative group that is put together, that if they're gonna do a season 2, it's gonna be fucking good.
Hmm.
But like you said, if there isn't a season 2, then this is a show that I feel has rewatch ability. Charlotte
Yeah.
didn't watch it with me. I think this is a perfect fucking show for Charlotte. I think this is a perfect show for Pepper.
Right. Right.
Kids,
Right.
especially Pepper, is she in high school now?
She's a freshman. She's
Yeah.
14.
So yeah, Charlotte and Pepper are the same age. Like, they're high school freshmen. Like that. It feels like this is a perfect show for a budding horror fan who is just becomes a teenager, late, like 11, 12, maybe about to go to high school. And yeah, plus, if it does nothing else, it introduces them to some kick-ass fucking music.
Yes. Yes. I agree with
If
that.
my kid ends up going, yeah, the show was fine, but who's that Iron Maiden? Fucking A, right? But like, for Charlotte and Pepper have watched horror movies before. Charlotte knows
Yeah.
who fucking Bruce Campbell is. She knows who Barbara Crampton is. She knows who Jeffrey Combs is. So
Right.
like she knows who these characters are. She knows who these actors are. So she'll be able to pick up on a lot of the references that you were talking about to other horror properties. I feel like it's a great gateway series, while also appealing to, you know, the old folks like us who grew up in that late 80s, early 90s period. So it's kind of a weird thing. It could be a one and done show, and I think it works perfectly. And I also, at the same exact time, want it to continue on, and I want to see what the writers and the directors have in line for the characters that I really liked.
Yeah. Dude, you know, you kind of do this thing where you kind of like get everything to this point where it's like, okay, well, that's where we wrap it up. But I'm like, oh, wait. We should talk about this part though, too, and this part too. Like, because you know, for me, the two things that really made me like the show a lot more were how deep they went with the deprogramming part of the show, and like the Reverend and his like henchmen. I like how like complicated that got. I really, really like the episode where Faith starts to date the football player, like the guy that we basically see get kidnapped and then he's dead, and he's just like, you know, the plot point for the show where this boy's been murdered, but we don't know why. We think it's a satanic cult, and we just find out, like I keep using this term comedy of errors, that like he died because he was just there, wrong place, wrong time. He gets kidnapped, he starts panicking, and he has an asthma attack. It has nothing to do with, you know, organ harvesting or satanic cults. It's just that he had a fucking, you know, asthma attack and died. His inhaler becomes like a smoking gun of the show, where it's just like, you know, this piece of evidence that kind of moves around in the town, and it could be the damning evidence that could get someone in trouble. I liked that at the very end, we're talking to the Reverend. He's in the back of the squad car. Bruce Campbell has arrested him, and he's like, okay, you're this religious group. You're all about faith and stuff, but why do you have these creepy masks? And the guy explains they're doves, and that doves are usually a sign that the light is coming. And it's this great way to justify this like very holy, very religious group having these creepy ass masks, you know?
Yeah.
I just love that. And then my last thing I'm going to say before we kind of wrap this up is you mentioned how Spud and Jordy are like your two favorite characters. Well, my favorite scene in this show, I think it is when they're in the church. Dylan's mom is, you know, she's in the middle of an exorcism, and Tracy's kind of stoking the fires in the church and making everybody turn against their family. And then Dylan and his friends kind of come out from different parts of the church. And what's great about that scene is it's intercut with them playing at a practice where they have this really great practice and they're playing metal music. And Jordy is such a great fucking singer that you just get pumped just listening to her sing and the metal music. And they do that kind of split screen thing where they're like showing the present day and someone's talking and then the band's playing over here. And I just really loved the energy of that sequence. It really got me pumped up.
I also like the scene where they talk about, I think it might even be that scene, or it might be one of the later scenes with the three of them where they discuss like there was like an actual case in, I want to say England.
Right,
where,
the slasher.
Yeah, where there was a slasher and the town went crazy and started to identify the slasher, and people got falsely accused and ended up being like imprisoned and killed. And It turned out that there was just one random killing, and that was completely random. And again, that it ties back to so many things. Like, one incident happens and it becomes used for all of these other incidences. And and you brought up the kid who died from the asthma attack. He becomes that smoking gun, so to speak. And the scene where Tracy convinces Faith to plant the asthma inhaler at Jordy's house, And like, again, there was part of me that was like, oh, I'm really starting to love Faith. I really hope she doesn't do this. And then in my head, I'm going, she's going to set something up. She's going to, and I really liked her and Jordy and like how they had their like rekindling of their friendship. And I would like, there's so much that I'd like to see in another season. Like I really like Jordy and Faith almost like going out on their own little adventure, or like, you know, Jordy, Spud, and Dylan like going to college together, and you know, just seeing scenes of them playing shows, you know, and getting to hear Kiara Aurelia's voice again, because she is like, she does kill it when she's performing. There are, you know, like all these things that I'm really interested in seeing more of, but I really like basically everything about this show. I'm so glad that I just accidentally found it on the list of things at Comic-Con. And, you know, when Bruce Campbell walks out at Comic-Con, you pretty much just shut up and go, okay, well, I got to do what he says now.
Right.
So I'm just really glad that I was there on that Thursday, because this is totally the type of show. Like I think we brought this up last time. Peacock is not Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Max. It's what, you know, and with no disrespect to Peacock, it's a secondary streaming service. It's not a streaming service that everyone has. Like if I say Netflix, probably 8 out of 10 people have Netflix. Probably 9 out of 10 people have Amazon Prime.
Right.
Peacock is Peacock is never the streaming service that I go to watch first. So if I had not been at Comic-Con on Thursday, and if I had not been going through the schedule and just looking for horror-related things, panels, discussions, I probably would not have known about this show, or I might have found out about it months from now. But the fact that I was there that Thursday, and the fact that like Bruce Campbell, Julie Bowen, Anna Camp all come out, and they really did. I want to give them so much credit, because they did such a great job of selling this show. They showed the first 30 minutes of the pilot, which obviously, like, I was hooked almost immediately. I thought it was funny. I love the music. I love the themes. But those 3 actors, along with Matthew Scott Kane, and I believe it was David J. Goodman, who were on the panel, they really sold how much they enjoyed making this show and how interesting it was. I always come back to something Julie Bowen said, where she said when she got the script and she saw that she was going to play the mom, she was like, I don't know. I've done this before. I've been the mom. I just did a decade on Modern Family as the mom. I don't need to be the mom anymore. And then she said she got to the end of the first episodes, the script, and she went, oh, okay. And she got hooked into how much more she had to do, both acting wise and physically in the show. And she got into that. And that also helped sell me on the show. And also, and again, something we talked about last week, Bruce Campbell playing really completely against character. Bruce Campbell really, like, dare I say, flexing his like acting chops in this show, because we're so used to seeing Bruce Campbell as like basically Ash, but in this universe, where he's the snarky, over the top, wisecracking character who's going to say funny one-liners. And he's as straightforward a police captain as you can have. His line from Comic-Con was, I play the cop that we wish all cops were. And I was like, yeah, like, I kind of believe that now. And I'm so glad that we found this show, because I thought it was a great, 7.5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a real testament to how good this show is that Bruce Campbell is this great character, and Bruce Campbell is just who he is. And so, like, you'd think that we're 44 minutes in, we would have been talking about Bruce Campbell this entire review, and yet we're talking about all these other characters. And really, what makes a person get attached to a story, a TV show, a book, a movie are the characters. And I think that this show, that's one of its strengths, is that the majority of these characters are likable and interesting. And you can't say that for a lot of modern horror shows. This is a really great fucking one. So I'm really glad we covered it. I think that maybe we might move on to Teacup next, right, Danny, or no?
I'm willing to stay with Peacock for another series. And Teacup was produced by James Wan, right? And
yes,
we have a history of covering James Wan inspired stuff on this show. So I'm definitely willing to check that out. I don't know what else is.
Yeah. So then, do you want to kind of cover what's on now before our video freezes up and gets all awkward?
Well, episodes 1 through 4 of Hysteria we covered last week. If you go onto the channel, we also interviewed our old friend David Weiner, who's I believe they extended the pre-orders of In Search of Darkness 1990 to 94 until November 3rd, which as of us recording is tomorrow. So go to, I think it's still 80shorrordoc.com if you want to join up with that. And we have a great almost hour-long interview with him. Plus, you got all my Comic-Con stuff up on the channel. 55 minutes of Mike Flanagan and the Flavengers talking about all of his future projects and all of the projects that they worked on, from, Oculus to Gerald's Game to Fall of the House of Usher, Midnight Mass, The Hauntings, etc. A ton of stuff from Comic-Con. Where Hysteria panels, the panels that I talked about, there's 2 20-plus minute videos of Bruce Campbell, Julie Bowen, and Anna Camp discussing this show. So if you want more from this show, you can watch those panels. Mayfair Witches panel and a review of the first episode of season 2 of that on AMC. There's also a bunch of stuff coming up that I still have some videos, believe it or not, from Comic-Con that I have to get through. Like Pete had a crazy week at work. Plus, it was Halloween. I just finished watching a documentary. Pete, you should probably check this out. Really fun on Netflix called King on Screen. It's an hour and 45 minutes about Stephen King movies. With like some of the biggest talking heads in the Stephen King movie universe. You got Mike Flanagan, you got Mick Garris, you get the directors of all of his other movies, many of his other movies, and a lot of the documentary is carried by the incredible Frank Darabont, who directed both The Green Mile, The Mist, and, oh, by the way, one of the greatest movies of all time, The Shawshank Redemption, which are all King adaptations.
Right.
Athena and I watched it last night. It's excellent. It flies by at an hour and 45 minutes. I'll probably do a short review of that. Charlotte and I are really excited because they just released a near 5-hour documentary on Shudder called The Doc of Chucky.
Oh, yeah, I heard of that. Yeah.
Yes. So Charlotte and I are going to be watching that in pieces over the next week, and we will be doing a review of that later on. So you have a lot to look forward to. You have a lot to catch up on if you're a fan of the Lassercast.
Shit, yeah, man. I actually want to check out that Chucky documentary too, so I'm gonna get on that. But we should check out Teacup, man. I'm down for that. So we made it to the end. We didn't freeze. We appreciate y'all watching our show. Go check out Hysteria if you haven't. I don't know why the fuck you would have watched this whole video if you haven't watched the show. But you guys are really good about leaving comments too, and Danny's really good about responding them. So let us know what you thought of Hysteria, and especially the ending of it. And otherwise, though, we'll be back next week with some more horror reviews. You guys have a good